Equity is called to order. Just a reminder for those who are joining us, we have a simultaneous Spanish translation. So if you can go over to the icon that says interpretation and follow what you can see. Is that being shared right now?
Just sharing it now. Sorry about that.
Great. So for those who would like to hear the Spanish translation, please follow what you can see from the slides. Then we'll proceed to the roll call. Commissioner Edith Arias.
Oh, she just entered the waiting room.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Edith Arias.
Hold on, yeah, unmute her 1 sec.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
no problem. She's here?
She is here.
Okay. Police Chief Asopardi.
Present.
Commissioner Gladys Balmas.
Present.
Commissioner Noam Faria.
Here.
City Manager Mike Futrell.
Here.
Commissioner Cheske Basan.
I've not seen her yet.
Okay. Commissioner McGovern.
I've not seen her yet.
Commissioner Manzon. Commissioner Pat Murray. I see here. Councilmember Mark Nogales.
Here.
Commissioner Kayla Powers.
Here.
Commissioner Rivera. Commissioner Bobby Vaughn.
I'm here.
Commissioner Andrea Fernandez. And I'm here.
You do have a quorum of the commission present.
Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Today, we will continue our work in phase 2. Last month, we identified, refined, and vetted the best options to be implemented in year 1. And I believe we had a very productive meeting. And I expect the momentum to continue. We will continue today and look at the proposed Community Safety and Equity Advisory Board. And inspired by the words of the prolific author, disability rights advocate, and political activist Helen Keller, I encourage all of you to keep your face to the sunshine and you cannot see a shadow. We will keep on believing there are brighter days ahead. With that, let's proceed to the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second. Who's seconding? Commissioner Murray has moved. Is there any second?
I'll second.
Oh, second by Commissioner. Those who are in favor say aye.
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 Those who disapprove say nay. And this is with a correction that I saw that email from Commissioner Fernandez, right? Lisa?
Yes, we've included that alternate Andrea Fernandez is present. So that's a correction that was made to the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So for today, can you move one more slide, please? That page. One more. So for today, we will review updates and additional information related to the Community Safety and Equity Advisory Board, that is the Strategy 2.4. And we will identify recommendations for a South San Francisco Community Safety and Equity Advisory Board to ensure focus on racial and social equity. With that, I'll hand it over to Kim to proceed to our agenda review.
And sorry, just a quick question. There's an Andrea in the participants. I'm just not sure if it's Andrea Fernandez. I just asked you
It's
to.
me.
Okay, perfect. Then
Yeah.
I'll just thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. As a reminder, my name is Kim Dorman, and I'm from the consultant team at Reimagining Associates. And I am really excited to be here with you this afternoon. I've been really impressed with this commission's unwavering focus on racial and social equity. You, the commissioners, have asked many important questions related to community advisory boards. And today we'll have a chance to review and discuss the information that was gathered, as well as to hear lessons learned from both Portland and National City. We'll have a chance to break into small groups. We'll also hear from the public and then have a chance to have a commission discussion. We are going to postpone the updates from SSF USD until next month. And then finally, we'll end with a review of next steps. This commission, as we know, was created to make sure that diverse and traditionally marginalized community members feel heard, feel safe in South San Francisco, feel comfortable bringing forward experiences with police and law enforcement, and ultimately are able to fulfill personal dreams. This can only happen if structural and institutional racism, along with individual racism, are addressed in all the complex ways that they exist. So we're hoping that today you keep that in mind as we identify roles and responsibilities for a possible South San Francisco Commission on Advisory Board. Next slide, please. We'd like to invite everyone to approach today's conversation by focusing on the goals of the Commission, being open to new ideas, and striving to understand each other's perspectives. I'd also like to remind the Commission of the guiding principles to focus on systemic and social inequities, to promote transparency and focus on action and systems change. Again, I think that these principles have been identified by you, and I'm interested in seeing how they might be able to come alive in today's conversation. So today, we're focusing on goal 2, reduce the harm of structural racism in the criminal justice system by reimagining public safety. In order to give us enough time to really understand community, what it would take to establish a community equity and safety advisory board, we're going to postpone strategy 2.3 to a future commission meeting. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Myra for our grounding exercise.
Hello, everyone. For the grounding exercise, I want to pose this question to you as you're about to really enter into this very important part of your journey with the Commission. What is the #1 result you hope that a South San Francisco Community Safety and Equity Advisory Board would achieve? You know, it's a step beyond your vision. It's more specific than that. What do you want, or what would your want be for this board, this new body, to achieve, to accomplish? Anyone want to start it off?
Mara, I'll kick in. I would hope we have a body that can, on a permanent basis, continue the work of this commission. I think the powerful questions we ask in a relatively safe space is important for the community. And this commission has a lifespan. It expires in July. What happens after that? I would hate to see all this work die. So I hope that whatever body gets formed, there's a permanent place where we can discuss these issues as a community.
That has come up several times from commission members. hoping things don't just vaporize that, things will continue. I can't see all of the hands. I don't have my view of everybody. So someone wants to jump in.
This is Gladys. I think I see this advisory board as a place where it can be real discussions about and input from community members to be able to have a real input into policy and practices that are current. So I think you want to have that community voice, and this is a really good place. But not only as an advisor, because I think, to me, if you're only advising, the city can take it or leave it, but it's more a place where you want to see accountability plans, metrics, where we can see real change.
Got it. Is there anyone else who wants to weigh in on what they would like to see come from this new body?
I am hoping that this will increase transparency and trust between public safety and our constituents.
Commissioner Bobby, it looked like you might, oh, maybe not. Oh, wait, you're unmuted. You're muted. There we go. No.
No?
We heard you before. Okay, we'll keep going and then come back.
Okay. Who's next?
I can go.
Okay, Commissioner Hermes.
Yeah, I think currently we have different parts of the city that engage with the communities, but I would like, it would be great if this board would enhance the existing bodies right now and put everybody together, and so the community can have a point of contact, and maybe this board could amplify that connection. It's very easy to suggest something and drop the ball, so this board could make make things happen. That's what I would like to see.
Got it. Kim, do you see anyone else?
Just Commissioner Edith, go ahead.
So I think also I was listening to everything I wanted to say. I think everyone before said it, but just really uplifting also the voice of those we're supposed to be talking. We sit here and we form commissions, and there's groups, that we talk about the needs of those in the community. But I would like to see this future board to really reach out and really uplift those voices directly, having contact directly with those in needs, instead of, just many times we're making assumptions of what is it that they need and what is it that will make a difference related to safety, or even just, again, as community members. So I wish that this board has more of that interactions with the actual constituents in the city.
Thank you, Commissioner Edith.
Thank you. So far, we have continued the work of this commission to build bridges and trust, to be sure to keep that connection going with community, to elevate transparency, to make sure that those who are supposed to be heard from community actually have a voice through this body, and to do more than advise, to actually affect real change. So I don't know if someone else wanted to add to that, but that's what we've heard in summary so far. Does that cover it?
but I'd like to say just a safe space where people can bring their ideas and their concerns. And all those things can happen in a safe space where everybody feels like they're welcome.
Thank you,
I
Commissioner.
add something else, please.
Is there anyone else before Hermes talks again?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think this is a great opportunity for our community to come together and feel engaged and to continue to be engaged with the members of this commission and with whoever is on the committee. And in a lot of ways, an extension of city council, and for folks to come together and bring issues up front. And as some of my colleagues have mentioned, in terms of transparency and just more communication. So I'm looking forward to see what happens next.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm looking around. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was just, I mean, it's sort of following on what other folks have said, but for me, the key is sort of a consistent feedback loop, right? People have mentioned communication. Well, I think the communication needs to be consistent, not just when something flares up, but the police department needs to have consistent information from the community, so they're not in a position where maybe they don't know that something is simmering, right? But so that they're constantly being informed from the community about what its priorities are or what its perceptions are. So that kind of continuous feedback loop, as well as the loop is when the police department is then constantly and on a periodic basis communicating to the public, well, actually, that may be the perception, but this is what's actually going on, and this is why. And this sort of really, it goes to transparency, communication. If we could somehow institutionalize that in South City through the use of this advisory board, I think that would be a very important step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Hermes, did you want to add one final brief comment?
Yes, please. Yeah, not to add more duties to the council members, but it will be great if one of the council members could be part of this board when the time permits. That way it's easier to have a council member to reach out and make things happen, because as a commissioner, I see that very useful. That'll be great.
Thank you. Okay. I think with that, thank you, Myra. So to get us started on the discussion related to community equity and a safety advisory board, we wanted to begin by setting the context for South San Francisco. And what we'll be doing in this next section is to first hear from Skye Woodruff, the city attorney, and Leah Lockhart from the human resources team in South San Francisco. Then we'll be followed by a presentation from Sharon Watts, the SSF Management Fellow, about different types of community safety advisory boards and oversight bodies. Then we'll also have an opportunity to hear from Portland, Oregon Police Equity Advisory Board and the National City Community and Police Relations Commission. Then we'll break into small groups, come back for public comment, and then have an opportunity for commissioner discussion. And there'll be a couple of points throughout those presentations to ask and answer questions, and we'll let you know when those come up. So with that, I'd like to invite Skye Woodruff.
All right, thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be with you. As mentioned, I'm the city attorney for the city, and I am here to provide you with a little bit of background about some of the legal structures that would apply to the type of advisory body that the commission has been talking about. I want to acknowledge up front that I'm about to provide you with a lot of information. And it's probably not particularly familiar to you, and it might actually in some ways be the opposite of what you would expect about how the city's government is organized. But I've tried to distill it down into consumable bits, and that's reflected in the written staff report that you all received. Even within the context, and I also just want to emphasize that even within the legal context I'm about to describe, I do think it's possible for this commission to develop a recommendation for an advisory body that will have a meaningful role in the relationship between the community and the police department. And so my hope is that this information will help the commission focus on creating an advisory body that's legally possible, but also meaningful. So with that brief introduction, the first thing that I think it's important to understand is that there are two kinds of cities in California. General law cities and charter cities. And South San Francisco is incorporated as a general law city. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be a general law city? What it means, and this is relevant for your consideration, is that South San Francisco only has the powers that are granted to it by the California Constitution and the state legislature. So this is true of all general law cities in California, and most cities in California are incorporated as general law cities. Since the city council doesn't have unlimited power with regard to how the city operates, because it can only exercise the powers that have been granted to it, that also means that it can't assign powers that it doesn't have. So it can't create an advisory body and give that advisory body a power that the city council itself doesn't possess. The second thing that's important to understand is that the city council has adopted what's referred to as the city manager or the council manager form of government. This is the most common form of city government in California among general law cities. Under this model, the powers of the city council and the powers of the city manager are separated. It's a pretty, well understood concept for American government, is that different branches have different powers that are separated. And what that means for general law cities that have adopted the council manager form of government is that the city manager controls and is responsible for most aspects of the administration of the city government. And that includes the hiring, firing, and discipline of the staff. Because that power rests with the city manager, that also means that the city manager is responsible for and empowered to do the hiring, firing, and discipline of the police chief. The city manager also controls most of the city's administrative policies and procedures that define how the city operates. The municipal code recognizes these separated powers of the council and the city manager. It lists the powers of the city manager, and it expressly provides that the city council won't interfere in the administration of the city. So just to sort of re-emphasize those first 2 points, South City is a general law city. It only has the powers that have been delegated to it by the California Constitution and the state legislature. And it operates under a city manager form of government in which most of the power of the administration of the city, including the hiring, firing, and discipline of employees, it rests with the city manager. And that includes the police chief as being under the power of the city manager for hiring, firing, and discipline. The third thing that's important to understand is that state law expressly assigns control over the police department of general law cities to the police chief. What that means in terms of control is that the chief is responsible for hiring, firing, training, and discipline of police officer. And the chief is also empowered to adopt policies and procedures for the police department. One aspect of why this is the case is that there's a state body that is responsible for setting certification requirements for police officers. And in effect, the police chief has to be somebody who holds that same certification and can therefore ensure that the police officers meet the state standards for obtaining and maintaining those certifications. And so the police department is a little bit of a special case in the city manager form of government, because although the city manager has general control over the administration of the city, that power is a little bit shared with the police chief for the police department because of these special certification requirements. The final thing that's really important to understand is that there is a combination of state laws that are adopted by the legislature and rules that have been created by California courts that treat public employee personnel records as confidential and subject to privacy protections. And why that's important for any type of advisory body related to policing is that investigations of complaints by the public about police officers are considered personnel records. So those complaints and the outcome of them are generally located in a police officer's personnel file and are subject to those confidentiality and privacy protections. There are some exceptions to that rule. The legislature has revised those rules as recently as 2019. I've outlined in the staff report what some of those exceptions are. But overall, the investigation of police officers related to complaints from the public are personnel matters that are confidential and private. And the city council does not actually have the authority to access those personnel records. And going back to one of the previous points, since the city council can't authorize an advisory body to exercise powers that it doesn't possess, it can't grant to an advisory body the authority to access those confidential and private personnel records. Which basically means that when a public complaint about a police officer is received and the city initiates an investigation, the documents that are generated in that and the outcome of that are generally treated as confidential, subject to the exceptions that I outlined. But what I do want to emphasize about this is that there is actually a role for an advisory body to play, and it's shown on this slide here, is that an advisory body can review and recommend changes to the policies and procedures that apply to the police department. And I think really importantly, it can act as a place for the public to interface with the city and gather community input about those policies and procedures to develop recommendations about the community, about changes that the community thinks should be made to those policies and procedures. So that wraps up my part of the presentation, and I'm happy to now turn it over to HR Director Leah Lockhart to cover some additional related aspects.
Thank you so much, Sky.
All right. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Leah Lockhart. I'm the Human Resources Director here, and I've been attending these meetings, kind of lurking in the background here, but I just wanted to say thank you all for your time and your hard work on this effort. In this section, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the labor relations environment in terms of how that would inform the role of a possible advisory board for public safety. And also just do a little bit more following on what Sky presented, a little bit more about the disciplinary process and how that works with our current MOUs as well as state law, and sort of how that how our complaint process would filter into that. So starting with labor relations, so we do have our all of our employees in the city, our full-time employees are represented by a bargaining group. And so we have our police association that represents our police officers. That is one of 7 of our group. And that is how we develop agreements with our bargaining units is governed by state law, most specifically the Myers-Milius-Brown Act. Some of you may be familiar with the NLRA, is that right? NLRA. So that governs the kind of nationally what private employers do, but this is a state law that governs specifically public employers. And so there's some differences in terms of how we approach our labor relations. So the central tenet of this law is that we do need to negotiate with our unions. It's called meet and confer under the law. And the things that we need to negotiate are wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment. So wages and hours are pretty straightforward. You can kind of guess what those are. Wages also includes benefits, any kind of monetary item of value that employees receive as compensation. The most nebulous term here is the terms and conditions of employment. And the way to look at that is really anything that substantially impacts the job or the environment in which that job needs to be done. Those are terms that we do need to negotiate. So for example, safety is a big one. Anything, if we have a policy change that impacts safety, we do need to meet and confer with our bargaining units. Same thing with, if we have a significant job change and we decide to increase the minimum requirements of a job and, we have to require everybody to get a certain degree or something like that. That also needs to be negotiated with our bargaining units. So the second bullet here is that there are some things that are reserved specifically for the city to decide. And the term here is merits, necessity, or organization of work. So how we organize the city, how many positions we have, what services we provide, those are all considered management rights decisions. So for example, if we are to create a community safety advisory board, that the city is in its rights, the city council specifically is in its rights to determine that that is something that we need to create. However, this is a bullet point at the bottom here. We do have the duty to bargain over the effects of any decisions. And so what that means is if a decision is made and it has an effect on our workforce under wages, hours, or terms and conditions of employment, we still need to bargain over those effects. So the example I gave in the staff report, if we have to reduce the workforce because we're in a financial crisis and we need to cut positions, that is a management decision. But then how we do that, how we go about that, is something that we need to negotiate. So, what is the order of layoff? What is, are there severance packages that we offer? What other options does the employee have? Can they move to a different position if their position is eliminated? So all of those things fall under the mandatory subjects of bargaining. So all of that being said, I did want to kind of refer back to Sky's presentation, and essentially the City Council has the authority to direct negotiations with our labor groups. So our suggestion in terms of the advisory board's role is prior to negotiating agreements or making significant policy changes, the advisory board could have a review role or recommendation role. So recommending new policies or changes to the police department that they would then present to council. Council, their role is to hire a negotiator, which is typically me and or outside counsel that assists with that, and give them direction in terms of what are the parameters, what do we want out of this bargaining contract. So it would essentially filter up to council, and then council would ultimately give that direction. I'll go to the next slide. Oh, I have control here. Okay. So I wanted to just explain a little bit more about the disciplinary process. And as Sky mentioned, ultimately the authority rests with the city manager. But I did want to kind of demystify this because I know that's an interest, in general. How are these decisions made? So one key thing here that is different about public employees, and this applies to everybody, not just police officers, but anybody who is in a full-time permanent position that's considered civil service employment, by a number of case laws and the Constitution, it has been determined that public employees do have what's called a property interest in their job, and they cannot have that revoked without due process or even their income. If we are talking about a lower level discipline like a suspension, there needs to be due process before we can implement that type of discipline. And so that means that, instead of being at-will employees, which is typical for public or private sector, we are considered just cause employees or for cause employees, meaning that discipline or that termination needs to be justified by, substantial evidence. And there's also an appeals process for that, which is in the next two bullets. So there are kind of a couple of steps in the disciplinary process. And two things to highlight is that there's a pre-disciplinary hearing, and then there's always a post-disciplinary appeals process. So the way that works is typically the police chief will ultimately propose the discipline, give them the evidence, and we're talking specifically about the police department, show, the investigation report, the evidence against the employee. The evidence, or the employee has the right to request a pre-disciplinary hearing, which in our city is the assistant city manager has been appointed to that role to review the evidence and make a determination before that decision is implemented. Post-disciplinary process is governed both by law and by our negotiated MOU with our unions. So both under the Police Officers Bill of Rights Act, there is a provision that there must be an appeals process. It doesn't get into detail as to what the steps are in that process. But our MOU does have, that is a negotiable item. So, how do we go about this appeals process? So currently, in our MOU, once a discipline has been implemented or a determination has been made, employees can first appeal that to the city manager. And city manager reviews it, makes a determination about it. And then the final step of that is, which is very common across all cities, and we have kind of a hybrid system here for discipline that is less than 40 hours of suspension. We have a personnel board that does those hearings. I will say we have not had a lot we've had very few in the last several years go to the personnel board. And then if it's greater than that, like a termination, it would go to binding arbitration, which is essentially we would then get referred an arbitrator from the state mediator's office. Typically, they will give us a selection of 7, and then there will be kind of either a mutual agreement between the city and the union, or there will be kind of a straw pick in terms of who the arbitrator is in that situation. Last point I wanted to make, which is not on this slide, is, and Skye kind of mentioned the general parameters around investigations. And I did want to get a little bit into that. There are procedures within the Police Officers Bill of Rights Act that govern specifically how we need to conduct investigations of police officers, certain information they need to be provided, timelines that need to be kept. But typically what happens in the city is if you have, that does go to the chief of police, and if it's a very clear issue of a policing issue that doesn't involve gross misconduct, typically that is an internal investigation. There are times when I will get involved along with the city attorney to review the complaint. If it's a serious misconduct allegation, if it's something employee complaint like sexual harassment or discrimination, those we typically do refer to an outside investigator to make sure that there is an independent analysis of the facts on those cases. So yes,
I wanted to just say thank you so much. That's incredibly interesting and important. I wanted to maybe just go back to the slide before Paige and just say, as you were finishing there, the slide after this page, there was just a point on you did a great job of kind of outlining the traditional kind of typical approach, and maybe just to make the last point there about what the advisory board can do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so what we would see as the role of an advisory board is, you know, and a lot of you mentioned transparency, and so we need to balance that with the privacy, you know, rules that that Skye mentioned. But I think there can be a process by which people can come to the advisory board with complaints, or to receive information, get, you know, have some time for education about the process of making complaints, kind of demystify that, but also take complaints and, you know, track them and make sure that they're getting, you know, followed up on. Again, there does need to be some separation in terms of the details and the confidential matter. But then the last part of that is tracking complaints and looking for trends. So, you know, if there were, you know, we could potentially have, you know, lists of types of complaints, you know, whether they were determined to be founded or unfounded. Are there a trend in terms of the types of complaints that we're getting, and or the, you know, the timeline of our investigations? How quickly do we follow up on them? So there's a number of things that I think within the parameters that have been set by law that, you know, an advisory board could help with that sort of connection to the community around this process.
Thank you so much. So we wanted to, in the next slide, just give the commission about 7 minutes or so, which is not that many, but there's a couple of different places where we're gonna be able to ask questions. If any commissioner has a question for the city attorney or for, so for Skye or Leah, now is a great time, maybe briefly, 1 or 2 minutes max, but we did want to open it up right now to see if you had any questions. There's a lot of information that we just heard. I see Kayla's hand.
Hi, yes. Well, thank you both for explaining all of that. I know it can be really complex and hard to distill in such a short amount of time. My question is on these complaint forms. Like, what information would this board actually be able to see? I assume maybe something like the officer's name would be redacted, or just like what all would they actually be able to know about the situation to be able to advise on it?
I'm going to refer that one to Skye.
So, I mean, I think I always want to make sure that I answer questions like this by being clear that we're going to have to go through a process to review anything before there'd be a final product, of course. In general, my understanding is that the fact of the complaint itself is generally public information, that who filed it and who was filed against is public information, that's disclosable. Anything after, so the complaint form that includes who's filing it, who it's filed against, and the nature of the complaint would generally be public information. Almost everything after that is going to go into the personnel file and become private and confidential. So, but I want to also, I guess I want to expand on that to say that if the commission's recommendation is that the advisory body have a role to receive complaints from the public about perceived police misconduct, that we would work to set up a process that where the public would understand what complaint was made within the bounds of the law, because that's sort of the transparency, public participation, interface with the public component of this that we're trying to make sure that the advisory body would have. So we would do what we could to make sure that that the complaint filed would have some public information so that both the advisory body and the public would understand what complaint had actually been made.
Hey, Skye, just a quick follow-up. You mentioned the person who filed the complaint, that information would be public. Did I hear that right?
Usually yes, but we might be able, if this commission felt that as part of the recommendation that it should be possible for the complainant's identity to be confidential, we would look at whether or not there was a method to provide that protection. So it would be something for the commission to consider as part of the recommendation is if it's legally possible, can we create a process for anonymous complaints to be filed?
Great. That was my next question. Thank you.
And Sky, you just brought up a really interesting point too, that maybe now is a good time to just remind everybody. Today, we're going to be looking at a lot of different information, hearing a lot of information. You've read the staff report, it's very extensive. There's more presentations coming. The aim for today is to identify a range of recommendations, and then we're going to be coming back to you all with those recommendations in sort of a formal proposal of what this advisory board would actually look like. So today is really that first draft, I guess I would say, and then we'll come back to you with a more specific proposal. And so I just say that with the reminder that, you know, there might be still questions at the end of the day that on multiple sides we'll need to follow up on. Let's see, any other commissioner questions before we go to the next? Norm, Commissioner Norm, go ahead.
And this question is to Sky. It's more of a clarification. I know there's management rights in the private sector, and there's management rights with city governments. Now, my question, and correct me if my interpretation is right or wrong, the management rights is kind of dictated by state law, whereas individual businesses do individual negotiations with their contracts, with their bargaining units. Is my interpretation correct?
Well, since I would hesitate to provide you an opinion on private sector negotiations because I know next to nothing about it. But what I will say is that, yes, there's an extensive body of state law, both legislative and court created, that specifies what issues have to actually be negotiated with a recognized bargaining unit, and which ones are under the rights of the city management, and which are subject to a negotiation process, but could ultimately be imposed if the parties weren't able to reach an agreement. But I want to emphasize about that last point that the legislature within the last few years created a very detailed process that has to be followed in order for management to impose certain obligations on public employees if the city and the bargaining unit can't reach an agreement. It is not a simple process.
Thank you, Sky.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add to that. So I did put some of that process in the staff report if you're interested in that. And that, you know, the other point on that is that the city can always decide to bargain over things that are specified as management rights, but we never recommend that, you know, to give away our, you know, authority to make decisions. But, you know, at a minimum, those three things that I listed are kind of the basic categories. And that is also something that changes under case law in terms of what is terms and conditions of employment. So there's, you know, new laws that come out all the time that say, yep, you do need to bargain over this, or no, you don't need to bargain over this. So it is a complex area.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think I'd like to move us to the next presentation, and there'll be more opportunity for questions later. Next slide, page. So I wanted to introduce Sharon Watts to provide an overview of existing models.
Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you to Sky and Leah for advising the Commission and the City of South San Francisco on the possibilities of a Community Safety Advisory Board. So we did hear tonight that an advisory board can review and recommend changes to policies and procedures, that a CSA can actually gather community input on policies and procedures to inform those recommendations. We also want to keep in mind that our Community Safety and Equity Advisory Board can also educate the community on issues that are important from the law enforcement perspective, as well as inform our police departments on things that are happening in the community. So before we get started, as Kim has already mentioned, we are setting the landscape tonight on what a community safety and equity advisory board can do. We've heard our legal and HR parameters, and we're also going to hear again from National City and Portland, Oregon on how they've moved forward with their different advisory boards. So as we review the different types, we have community safety advisory boards. There are also police oversight models, and we're going to talk about 3 types tonight and just give you a general overview. We did provide you with a thorough staff report to give you more information. But those models are the investigative, review focused, and auditor monitor focused. And then there's the hybrid model. And what we found with the hybrid model is it can be a combination of any of these models that are presented to you tonight. Next slide, please. So for community safety advisory boards, we have highlighted in green ideas that are similar to what we've heard previously from commission. So here we find that they can, again, provide recommendations regarding community issues that impact safety, security, the quality of life by seeking input from diverse groups of community members. So in our grounding exercise, we definitely heard how important it is for community voice to be at the table with our community safety and equity advisory board. We can also assist law enforcement agencies with conducting research, provide skilled volunteer services, support community outreach efforts. Again, commission has asked to be able to review data and make recommendations. Here we have it, the opportunity through a community safety advisory board. It is also a collaborative partnership between the community, law enforcement, and other public safety entities within the city. So as we think about our community safety advisory board being equitable, we want to think about all things necessary for our community to be safe. We can focus on crime reduction, solution building, receiving citizen complaints, and then how can we be prepared for disasters? The staff report had some models of places with safety advisory boards that are near to us here in South San Francisco, but the emphasis was the community input, right? So community safety advisory boards are community stakeholder investments. So you have the gamut of your community invested in public safety, and that's what we find as important components to the models that were presented to you. Next slide. We will, I won't go over these police oversight models because they are in the staff report, but what's important to look at is that, or to recall is that cities with larger populations typically have different oversight models with more authority or capacity to do different things. So these oversight models typically fall into those greater populated cities with greater funding. So investigative, we highlighted Atlanta, Chicago, and Long Beach. For the review model, Baltimore, San Diego, Las Vegas, and then the auditor monitor, Fresno, California, the County of Los Angeles, and Wichita, Kansas. Next slide. So here we have the summary of police oversight models. For investigative models, they do operate independently of police departments. They address complaints against law enforcement. They have the authority to investigate certain complaints. So these are pre-identified. So based on how that organization or that oversight body was set up, they have identified complaints that they will specifically review and make recommendations on, and then they move forward. The members of this body must go through extensive training. So it's very costly to host an investigative body. It also requires for a selective body because you want to, because they are designed to have people who are able to perform the work. Not to say that people cannot be trained from our general population, but it's highly selective. The next is the review model. And here they review the quality of completed police internal affairs investigations. So once again, these are closed investigations. We found that they are able to receive and forward complaints. They're also able to hear appeals, make recommendations for discipline, policy, or procedure. And they provide opportunity for community input. Again, they are also very costly. And cost just really looks at, in terms of the training, the amount of staff, the time investment to do the work. But we see the highlight here is the opportunity for community input, similar to what our commission is asking. The auditor monitor model performs ongoing reviews of the complaint process, and it's also designed to promote organizational change by conducting systematic review of police policies, practices, or trainings. And here it's to really identify the gaps in service provision or the gaps in how complaints are handled, anything within public safety that can be readdressed. It's highly researched data, so it can take a long time to get through the process. It requires select expertise again. It's less expensive than the investigative model, but more expensive than the review model. But some highlights of these are to remember that it's based on the best fit for your city, right? So we recognize that not every city has an oversight body. We found that there was a survey in 2018 that found that only 16% had an advisory model and 38% had a review model, and 21% had investigative only, and 7% an audit model. But only less than 200 of these models exist in the nation. So as South San Francisco is looking to create this community safety and equity advisory, we recognize it's not going to be like every other city, and it may not have all of these components. Next slide. So the recommendation is for the hybrid model here in South San Francisco. And the hybrid model is the combination of Community Safety Advisory Board and some components of any of the other oversight models. And it's also recommended to have a holistic approach to community safety, which includes housing, education, social services, and policing. And as I mentioned earlier, public safety, community safety, our community safety advisory board can definitely be interchangeable. And how safe is the community? Our safety expands greater than the scope of our law enforcement, right? And so once we get past or get to the root causes and begin to address other issues, we'll be able to address true public and community safety. So the goals for a hybrid model here in South San Francisco is, of course, to achieve transparency and accountability, to reduce fear of and misconduct associated with law enforcement. But again, misconduct can come from anywhere that we're engaging in our community. It's also designed to enhance safety nets that support communities previously harmed by isolation and systemic injustice. And we know, because of the commitment of this commission, that harm is not equal, right? So different communities experience different harms, but we want our Community Safety and Equity Advisory Board to be able to ensure safety nets are in place. The other goal is to restore dignity and equity and community participation and decision-making. So as we heard earlier, bringing the people that we're talking about and aiming to serve to the table and making sure their voices are heard. And we want to build trust, right? All of the models are designed to strengthen relationship between law enforcement and community. So it is a community capacity building mechanism as well. Next slide. So why this recommendation of a hybrid model? Well, it was just based on a review of the research and also based on the legal and HR specific considerations in South San Francisco. So we want to move past what we can't do, but keeping those parameters in mind of what we can do. We heard what Commission said. Commissioners have expressed support for a Community Equity and Safety Advisory Board that will review data on public safety, that will make recommendations, that will receive citizen complaints regarding law enforcement misconduct, foster community trust, and address institutional and structural racism. Next slide. So the staff report also, we found and identified several hybrid models. Portland is here to talk to us tonight. National City is here to talk to us tonight. I'm really excited to hear about their processes, how they're able to keep a racial and social equity lens at the forefront, how to engage community. But we highlight again, these hybrid models provides community input, allows a forum for citizens to voice their concerns about police conduct and practices. And they also allow for community to review current and proposed police department policies and to report back on statistics on officer-involved shootings, use of force, and complaints. So there's a wide range of what a community safety advisory board does and what they're allowed to do and how they operate and engage with community. Next slide. So we have a list of recommended responsibilities, and tonight you all are going to talk about that with us in our small groups. But we did want to highlight that the Community Safety and Equity Advisory Board will serve as a liaison between the community, law enforcement, city council, and commissions. That they will initiate and lead conversations to increase employee awareness related to race and inequities, keeping the police chief apprised of community needs for police services, disaster preparedness, and assist in informing the community about the function and role of South San Francisco Police Department. We talked about receiving and forwarding complaints and providing effective community outreach, host community forums and listening sessions, and staying apprised of community concerns. So that speaks to the communication loop that we heard one of the commissioners mention earlier today as well. Other responsibilities include making recommendations to improve equity, diversity, and inclusion, and related to public safety, including through changes of public safety policies and procedures. Reviewing policies and practices and advocating for early intervention strategies that minimize involvement of youth in the criminal justice system, establishing rules of conduct, bylaws with a racial and social equity lens, and designing an alternative and confidential way through which community members may submit complaints. So these recommended responsibilities or roles of this body have identified or relate or connect to all of the things that we heard early in our grounding exercise. Next slide. So here are some other recommended components for our advisory board, and this is the composition. So it would be voluntary. We're thinking about 9 members and 1 alternate member, that the members would be appointed by city council, that there would be 4-year terms, and the board should reflect South San Francisco's demographics. Again, your community safety and equity advisory board should mirror your community. So members must be residents of South San Francisco and demonstrate knowledge of experiences of our limited English speakers, people who are unhoused, people living with mental illnesses. 1 or more of the members should be from the following communities, and they're all listed here. But we want to make sure that it is an inclusive and intentional, diverse commission, right? So we can't achieve equity without making sure that we're tapping in to the community of South San Francisco. Next slide. So I want to say thank you very much for following along with us tonight. Are there any questions?
I have a question, Commissioner Andrea here. First of all, thanks for that presentation and for all of the great information that you shared. There were a lot of points, I think, where you mentioned, particularly one that resonated is that safety extends beyond kind of just our traditional view of law enforcement, right? I think we as a community can keep each other safe, right? And of course it extends into a bigger conversation. A question in particular in terms of the recruitment for the commission, for the board, I know it's mentioned that it's 9 members and then 1 alternate. And they're appointed by city council. Will these applications be still available to the wider community at large, or will it be more so of a appointment on the discretion of the city council, because I think with my experience with joining this commission, I remember emailing, you know, the email that was provided in regards to information for this commission to find out that all of the commissioners had already been appointed, right? So I think it would be great to know how are we thinking in terms of recruitment and getting the word out to ensure that folks who may not necessarily be visible to the city council already, but have a desire and you know are from these communities that I think would resonate well, that they have the opportunity to then apply if they are interested.
So I would like to say that's a very good question, and Commissioner Futrell is going to answer it. But do keep in mind that tonight is a discussion, right? So we're going to talk about all of those things, and any recommendation on how this could possibly work, we want to hear that tonight, and then we can do the research and bring it back to you in May. But I will definitely have Commissioner Futrell go ahead and take a stab at that.
Well, I was going to say, I would see this operating like all of our boards. So we actually have board interviews tomorrow night for a number of city boards. So the process is very transparent. There's outreach to the community, encouraging people to apply. It's pretty easy to apply. Who applies is transparent. Their applications are transparent. They're all posted. You know, when the clerk posts the agenda, and the meetings at which they are interviewed and the council discussion on who to appoint, those are public meetings, and public comments are welcome. So from my view, it's a very transparent process that allows for public input. And that seems that would match what we're trying to do here. I agree that the appointment process for this commission was different because it's ad hoc, created by the then mayor. But I think if you make it a permanent body, it should have that transparency and allow for public input.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Oh, Commissioner Hermes.
Yes. Yeah, so this commission will have a secretary that will gather all the information.
If it's okay, Sharon, I think, Hermes, this goes to the issue of providing resources to the commission. So a secretary, a staff that would actually follow up and provide research. And as a formal board, their meetings would be public meetings. There'll have to be minutes. So yes, I think we as a city would just not only commit to having this initiative, but also committing the necessary resources so that it's effective. So it will have to have some of its own staff and research capabilities, and not just appoint a bunch of people and leave them out there and expect them to kind of figure it out on their own. So yeah, I would expect that it would have its own budget so that it could do its job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would there be any other questions? If not, Kim, let's move forward. Thank you, Paige.
Cool. Thank you so much, Sharon. I think you covered a lot of territory and have given us even more information to consider in our small groups. But before we go to the small groups, I wanted to invite the team from the Portland, Oregon Police Equity Advisory Board. We're really looking forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Oh. Go to the next slide. All right, so I'd like to start with introductions to who we have presenting today. Our first is the chair of our Police Equity Advisory Council, Tony Dubois. Tony is joined via phone, so he should be able to speak up.
Gotcha. I need to sorry, I didn't realize that. I need to unmute Tony then. Do you know if Tony's area code is 503?
Yep.
Great. Okay. One moment. You should be able to unmute now, Tony, if you can hear me.
All right. I finally got unmuted.
Sorry about that. Just didn't realize that that was you.
No worries. Tony Dubois here. I wanted to thank go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tony.
No, I was going to say briefly, I want to, if you hear background radio, I'm still at work, so I want to apologize. But go ahead, Brody, to the next person.
Our next is our vice chair, Shayna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shayna Pomerantz, and I'm also a Bay Area native, so I'm excited to be here.
Welcome to our meeting.
My name is Brody Sargent. I am not a member of PEAC, but I am the staff liaison from the Portland Police Bureau.
Thank you all for coming.
So excited to hear from you.
Sargent is a last name, not a rank, just to be clear. So we kind of want to start with where I'm from, and not dwell on it too much, but I'm from the Equity and Inclusion Office of the Portland Police Bureau, where I'm a program specialist. So I answer directly to the head of the office, which is the equity manager. We are located within the chief's office. There's an equity office in most of the major bureaus in Portland. And we're in charge of forwarding all kind of equity work throughout the bureau and working with all members within the police bureau on equity goals and initiatives in every single kind of major, in a lot of the major units. And we also work with the Office of Equity and Human Rights, which is an office that works for the broader equity goals of the entire city of Portland. Next slide, please. Tony, do you want to take this one? It's the goals and purpose slide.
Yes, I will do I have to listen to everyone speak. I'm going to do a modified version. A lot of things I've heard is right on track with what I was going to say, as far as making sure you have diversity in the teams and representing the public. Also, what I'm going to add, which I'm noticing, one of the things you want to make sure is you do give guidance, but you do not want the meetings to be so formal. That is a huge turnoff. I get a chance to jump into a lot of meetings personally outside of what we're doing at PAC, and you get to hear different styles throughout the country. And it's one of the things I think is important for not just the city, but the members that want to join us. Ask them, one of your questions as you select people is, do you participate in other, councils? You're going to hear Shayna say something similar. I think that's very important. One of the things I was going to mention, which you guys have mentioned, which is very strong in our particular group here, and I'm going to say PEAC again, but one of the things I would like to practice spelling out is Portland Equity Advisory Council. You're going to have people who've never been to your meeting. They may drop in from here and there, and Brody and I and others do this a lot. We'll mention other councils like, oh, they're from CRC and they're from PCEP. You have to practice spelling out the acronyms because you get used to it. And we know what they mean. We know there are different councils. So it's important to spell those things out. The purpose is you want to hear the diversity on each side of your city. I live on the west side, but I do travel in the numbers a lot. You want to speak in terms of the language of the people in these meetings. I know this is a more formal meeting, But anyone that's in Portland, I say, hey, I'm going to go visit the numbers. They immediately know what I'm talking about. Or if I say, hey, I'm going to hit the South Side, you have to speak in terms of the people. And most importantly, and I'm going to wrap it up with this because I want to make sure everyone is heard, is you have to be results driven. I'm very results driven. If you were to listen to our meetings, I try to be results driven, but also we will adjust the meeting if it's an important topic. We'll push everything to the next meeting if it's very important, which is something happened last night in one of our meetings. We're like, you know what? We're going to scrap this and move it to the next meeting. This is a very touching topic. Let's address it. We do not dodge hot things because people want results. This is why they come to these meetings. Brody, I'm going to let you go ahead and pass this on to Shana because everything else I've heard, we can explain how we work within our meeting towards the end.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. So I'm just going to go over the history. Once again, this is going to be super high level. We run a lot of our equity work, but not all of it, off of a racial equity plan, which is just a 5-year plan for the city that outlines some basic goals. The police bureau has its specific plan, which is was 64 goals at one point. I think we've cut it down a bit. One of those goals was to have the equity office itself have an advisory council that is really making sure that whatever work is being done by my boss, Marlon, and myself, and our new member, our new member who's in charge of equity training, Lauren Rosenstein, that all of the work that we're doing is aligned with what the community wants. And so to do that, we recruited a group that we really prioritized. Something that I saw earlier was prioritize diversity, and that includes people who are all sorts of diversity, but also trying not to just to get people who are both experienced in councils, but also people who might be new, so that not everyone is necessarily the same voices that are heard. Portland has a lot of councils. The police has a lot of advisories in Portland. And so we really wanted to get some, both hear some consistent community leaders, but also some fresh voices. And now we've kind of reached the end of the first year of that group. We're kind of moving into the second phase of the group's operation. I'm ready for the next slide. So a typical meeting goes introduction of members and guests. The meetings are open to the public. We brought in bureau members who are in charge of doing work, and a lot of times they're very technical specific, like the captain of training, the captain of the manager of fiscal services or the budget, the manager of personnel and recruitment, and had them present on what they're doing and then get feedback and answer questions from the community about how they're making sure that their efforts in all aspects of police work are focusing on equity and reducing racial barriers and disparities. Next, the group kind of does some basic minutes, basic business, approves minutes, votes on things if necessary. Then they get some updates from myself and my boss and our training analyst, who kind of give updates on what the equity office in specific is doing. Then a lot of time, if there's any group work or group projects, that's done. And then we like to leave the last half hour of our 2.5-hour meeting open to discussions of importance. And that is a lot of times going to be depending on what's in the national news, what's in the local news, so what someone experienced. So that's a chance that a lot of times these groups are very impacted by things like the death of George Floyd last year, the coronavirus, and we made space for all of those things to not ask our members to put to the side what they're feeling and what they're experiencing and what the nation is feeling and experiencing in that space. So that's about a typical meeting, kind of goes through those steps, although we are willing to adjust, as Tony said, if something important comes up. Ready for the next slide. And this is now, I'm going to pass it off totally to the members.
All right, well, thank you so much. Again, my name is Shana Pomerantz. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up if, okay, great. My pronouns are she, her. So just to clarify a couple of things, I'm spotlighted here, so that got really big. I wonder if I can look at y'all so I can not just look at me. So that's one thing I like to do is when I'm in the Zoom space, I really like to look at everyone's faces. And so just a little bit about me, I come into this work as a community organizer. I help lead a program called Race Talks, Uniting to Break the Chains of Racism. And so that is we are in our 11th year of programming. It was established by my mom, who is a retired Portland Public School elementary school teacher, and she did it in retirement. And we initially started as a community dialogue forum. And we also held discussion groups with police officers in community for several years. So that's another potential model that you might want to explore as well. So I come into this work really as a community activist and advocate. I have worked in the city. I've worked for the state. I come in as a lawyer. I have a JD. I'm not licensed to practice law, but I share that just because I think sometimes we get real education heavy when we're trying to do recruitment. And kind of to tag on to what Tony said, it's really important to really highlight who is missing at the table. So when you're looking at issues of equity and you're looking at issues of safety, the question is who's being most impacted. I grew up in Oakland. I went to Berkeley High School. So my experience coming up in the Bay is very different than what I remember South San Francisco being like. But I know it's a very diverse area. And so just for context, in Portland, our Black community, we make up 6% of Portland, 2% of the state. So Black people are in the minority here. Indigenous, Native folks are in the minority here. We do have some more Latin, Latinx folks and Asian folks represented, but it's primarily white. And so a lot of the conversations we're having are about decentering whiteness and basically overcoming white supremacy in institutions such as policing. And so I want to be really frank about that and use that language because there's a lot of intention that becomes set up. So one of the things that I would certainly recommend, and I, in fact, proposed it last night, is that when you look in your spaces, again, most people's cameras are off, but again, when we're talking about equity, we can't be afraid to talk about race and we can't be afraid to talk about racism. And so I think being able to introduce yourself and how you identify, I'm a very fair-skinned Black woman. So my experience moving through the world is going to be very different from my mother, who is a very dark-skinned Black woman. And so we use something called progressive stacking order. And so what that is looking at BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, POC. And so we say BIPOC, one, so people of color are not all just grouped together as if we're all having the same lived experience, but recognizing that laws specifically have been created to impact Black people. Then we have the Indigenous, Native, tribal experience, and then we have people of color, and then white. And within each of those identities and cultures, we have further marginalization, right? We have colorism, we have religion, we have ability, we have gender identity, so on and so forth. So making sure that we are identifying, and I'm happy to talk offline about what that instructional feedback actually looks like. So that's one way that you can also increase accessibility to your members. One of the things we also talk about is, paying for free labor. So if you're a city employee, you're getting paid to be here. When I show up and give my time, I'm giving free labor. And so I have to look at what is the compensation and the value. So that means my voice really needs to be prioritized and compensated. And so I don't know if you have a budget, but what tends to happen in Portland is because there's not a lot of people of color, we get recycled doing the same things on the same committees, and it's tiresome. So if you have a budget to actually hire people that do equity work and trainings, pay them to come in and lead a training and actually give some explanation to the work, because I guarantee you, if they're sitting on this body, they're probably involved in some way, shape, or form. And as far as it was mentioned about the cross-representation, having folks from different bodies. So I think that's a great idea. I think cross collaboration and bridge building is super important when you're looking at your hybrid model. So I sit on this equity body. I also sit on the Citizens Review Committee, which actually reviews the police appeals. I was up till about 2 a.m. this morning contributing to a brief recommendation to our city council. There's a lot of hours that goes into this. I'm one of 2 Black women on a body that is comprised of almost all white people, and also are all attorneys. And so that's not a very accessible space when you're talking about reading through policy and law and things like that. So I would definitely encourage the city attorneys who are here. I think it's important that a city attorney is present to really explain the law, not just for the benefit of the citizens, but for the officers, because we've certainly had a number of concerns around standard review and needing to explain what is due process and what are you actually legally mandated to follow, because you'd be surprised that when there are claims of discrimination in a review process, no one stopped to think, oh, maybe I need a person of color to come in and evaluate this through a racial lens. You know, can a cis white man or woman be an objective person to evaluating that? So I think that covers my last point I wanted to mention is when Brody mentioned that we were giving our director presentations, we as a group actually went through the equity plan first and came up with specific questions for those directors, because we didn't want to just have them come in and just give a blanketed presentation about what they were doing. Because one, we didn't think that was a good use of their time or ours. So we looked at the equity plan, identified what are the areas that we're actually most interested, we have concerns. And then, so it wasn't like a gotcha kind of moment for them, but it was a very transparent, open kind of process. We formulated questions, sent it to them so they knew exactly what was going to be asked of them and they could prepare for that. And then we had a Q&A dialogue based on that. So again, when you're talking about creating kind of this bridge building, open, transparent, inclusive, I think you have to be open to giving people the opportunity to show their best selves and just kind of go from there. So I think that's pretty much everything I had to share. Thank you so much for your time. And we're ready to answer questions if you have any. And Tony, I'll turn it over to you because I know you had some feedback about your experience as well.
Well, we have just a couple more minutes. That would be great. And then I think we are going to have another presentation and then we'll have question and answers. So, so thank you so much for sharing. Go ahead, Tony.
You're welcome. Oh, I was just going to say, really briefly, Shane covered a lot of things I knew she was going to cover. I'm very proud of you as usual. Full transparency, I literally just got off work. I've worked as a contractor agent for Homeland Security. So a lot of things I give to this particular group is actually free as well. But I wanted to give people the inside solution that is being worked on. That's one of the things that's very important that people don't realize, the public. When you don't publicize what you're doing, that people assume you're doing nothing. So this particular council does its best to get the word out. So I think that's probably your second most important task, is getting the word out. You have to reach out to all factors in all communities. So it's very important. I'll give it back to you, and we're ready for your question.
That's wonderful. I took a lot of notes. Thank you so much. All right. So with that, I think, Paige, if you don't mind going back to the PowerPoint, I'd like to invite the National City team, and particularly Captain Graham Young. And then we'll take questions for both of our guest speakers.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name's Graham Young, captain with National City Police Department. I've been a police officer here in National City for about 27 years. I grew up just outside the city. So I'm pretty familiar with the city. If you can move the next slide, please. So I want to talk about our Community and Police Relations Commission. We have a mission with the commission is to provide a forum for citizens to voice their concerns about the police conduct, policies, and practices. This can come in a different manners, such as they are able to file complaints instead of, in case a citizen does not want to come into the police department. This gives them a safe space to where they can actually file a complaint through the CPRC, is what we call it with the acronym. I attached, I don't know if you've received them, I attached to 3 different languages these complaint forms are in from the CPRC. One's Tagalog, one's Spanish, and one's English. So like I said, they can file complaints. Also during the meetings, the public meetings, there's a public comment portion of the meeting where each person wants to comment on something that's police related or community related. They have 3 minutes to do so. Based on our format for conduct of affairs under the Brown Act, and that if it's brought up in the community comment section, it will not be addressed during that agenda. Items that are brought up have to be agenda items so that all parties are prepared for the discussion. And then also during this forum that includes our CPRC is a chance to ask about training that they can have and also projects that both the CPRC and the police department are involved in. Additionally, it's to examine police practices and policies as they pertain to conduct issues, identify opportunities to mediate adversity between National City Police Department and citizens' complaints. So there are opportunities not in the public forum to where if somebody doesn't necessarily want to file a formal complaint, they will set up with whether it be the sergeant of the internal affairs unit, the lieutenant, a captain, or sometimes even the chief to meet in a safe space to discuss with CPRC representation there an issue that had come up. So if you'd like to change the slide, please. So an overview, we are a review model. We were established in 2003. I was on approximately, was that 9 years when we first started this. It was very, it was kind of unknown within our city. We never had a review commission before. It's comprised of 8 members. 7 are voting members. 1 is non-voting, and that's somebody who's from the National City Police Officers Association. But also in these meetings that are public meetings, we have the police chief will show up. I'll show up, a sergeant for the internal affairs division, also lieutenant of the internal affairs division. And we'll have the city attorney, the city manager's assistant. Now, the latter part, none of these people have any voting rights or membership. They're there strictly for consultation to clarify issues that come up so they can give explanations. The police department is not an oversight of the CPRC. It's the CPRC directly reports to the mayor and city council. So they actually report back to the city council and the mayor in reports. They, like I said, they accept complaints directly from the public if needed. Investigations are handled by the National City Police Department Internal Affairs Division. Next slide, please. Internal Affairs report is submitted to the commission for review. So I noticed earlier on in the presentation that we open our internal affairs to board members of the, we'll just say the acronym CPRC for full view. So the chairperson or the assistant chairperson or a combination of them and the rest of the board can come in. They usually come in right before our quarterly meetings we have that are public meetings. They'll review as many cases as they like. Every part of that investigation is open to them through the Internal Affairs Division. The only thing we do not allow is for that file to leave the office. They can take as many notes as they like, and then they can take them back to their commission, and then they can talk about it. And if there's an issue with one of the cases that they don't see or they need clarification on, they can bring that up as an agenda item through the commission. The CPRC has the ability to request that the investigating officer and or witness officers to appear at the review, but the officers that are the subject of the investigation or the complaint cannot be compelled to testify against themselves at the CPRC public meetings. They determine the finding, if the finding of this is supported by evidence and proves or provides the results to the National City Police Department. So it's kind of, in a roundabout way, it goes back to the chief of police, but what will happen is they'll do their report. They'll talk about their findings in the CPR public meeting, but the reports will go through the city council. The city council will then in turn go to our city manager. Our city manager will then talk to the police chief to see if there's any policies or procedures or practices that need to be changed. Next slide, please. Decisions are advisory and non-binding. They can provide input to the police department for policies and does not make recommendations of discipline. So I'd like to kind of go over a couple of things when it comes to the makeup of our population. We have 62,000 people that live in National City. It swells to over double that during this daytime hours. We have a Navy base that's located just to the west of us on the bay. We're approximately 5 miles away from our international border, just south of San Diego. The per capita for our city is 21,000. The median income is 50,000, which means about 19.9% of our population is below the poverty level. Our demographics, we have 63% Hispanic, 19% Asian, 10% white, African American make up 4.5%, and Native Americans are about 1%. We are a full service police department. We take on average about 60,000 calls a year. So, and just kind of a background, we've always had a really good working relationship with our community. We got ahead of what we thought was going to be coming anyways back in 2003 when we developed this. We use our CPRC, for example. I've worked in there as a lieutenant. I'm in charge of it right now as a captain. But we like to include our CPRC in some of our decision making. What's coming up is we have a CAD system, which is a computed automated dispatch, which basically bring the calls in. And when we're dealing with issues that are coming up with RIPA, we want to have our CPRC involved to give us some input on how they would like our CAD system set up. I just think that's a good part of it.
Well, maybe I'll just jump in here and see if, well, first of all, thank you so much. That's, again, so much great information. We have a little bit of time for questions. So I know that, again, this is a lot of information, but we heard a lot of questions from commissioners and community members, and are so thankful for you all, both from Portland and from National City, explaining how you're working in the community in this way. So I wanted to just spend maybe 5 to 7 minutes opening it up for questions for folks. Do we have any questions for our guest speakers?
I'll start. And this can be for anyone. What do you think was the hardest thing in terms of establishing your commissions?
I can jump in for that. As a community member, I think first and foremost, when you are stepping into a space with law enforcement, I think it's really important to, again, center the marginalized voices and get a sense of why are folks here? You know, what is their intention and passion? Because a lot of times we look at each other and we size each other up and we make assumptions, and often it's incorrect, right? And so I think if there's an opportunity for people to be able to share what brought them there, what their motivation is, I think it really opens up being able to know who each other is and build trust quite quickly.
Yeah, if I could add on that, we really reach out to our community and police relations commissions for them to go on ride-alongs and for also to do our use of force workshops. It's important for the community members to know exactly what we do. And, you know, when you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you get an idea. And that's where I think this bridges the gap. We listen to the community and they listen to us. I think one of the really important things for our department, back in 2018, the city did a survey, a satisfaction survey, and we scored about an 82%, which is actually even higher than our fire department, which says a lot because everybody loves firefighters, right? So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from the commissioners or our guest speakers?
As an offshoot of the current situation regarding the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd, because I know that your groups had been established long before that, did you make changes or was it, did you make changes to your composition or to whatever you're doing right now?
So because Portland had a spotlight on it for much of the summer and we were under quarantine, I think the biggest thing was really just asking people how they were doing and giving space for folks to check in. Because it was stressful. There was a lot of stress. Like I said, in our community, Black people make up 6% of the population. We had Proud Boys, we had Patriot Prayer, you know, whereas initially under the pandemic, people were being very respectful and walking and being socially distant once all the fighting and the riots and everything and attacks started happening. It was scary just to walk outside, and we're seeing that right now with the Asian community, with attacks on elders, and you know, and so I think just being able to have space and talk about it. We did that last night in our meeting. You know, just those kinds of frequent check-ins are really important, and like the captain said, even for law enforcement, I think a lot of them are dealing with things personally that because they're wearing the uniform, often that doesn't even get an opportunity to be discussed. So one of the best people we have in our group is an officer who comes. She's a Black woman, and I value her input so much.
For National City, we, like the rest of San Diego County, made a policy to not to use the lateral vascular neck restraint, which LVNR, which misnamed by the media as a chokehold, but we no longer use that as well as the rest of San Diego County. We as a county decided we weren't going to use that defensive tactic maneuver. So that's one of the changes we had. But we also had a lot of community outpouring. I think if you build these bridges between community and police, I mean, the police are the ones, the community are the ones that give the power to police. And when you have, during these riots that happened in other cities, when you had members of the community coming to the police department or voicing on social media, they're willing to stand with the police and defend the city of National City from riots, that says a lot about relations between us and the community.
Can I clarify something? Our CRC review body is completely different from the Portland Equity Advisory Council that's here today that I'm representing with Brody and Tony. So for our Citizens Review Committee, we actually we have a committee that focuses specifically on use of force and excessive force during protests. So we have a subcommittee that meets every month. The numbers have been growing considerably in terms of fielding concerns from citizens about what they're experiencing. And so that also is generated through the complaint process. So I wish we could say that we have enacted things much more efficiently in Portland. That has not been the case. We actually voted to overturn the way that the CRC is structured, and that is actually in the process of being dismantled and reimagined. So next month, we'll start hearing cases, actual complaints from citizens regarding a lot of the protests, and there's many of them.
Good to know. Thank you.
I see
Yeah,
a couple
Tony
of
Dubois
hands.
here.
Okay. And I see a couple of
I
hands
was
from
gonna-
the commissioners. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to add to that, what everyone's hearing is the great contrast of size of cities and also the complexity of getting things done. You know, places like Portland, we want things to move very quickly. And so when you add politics and trying to get things processed, you got to, you know, move things a little quickly. And so, you know, there's a large group that wants to work with the police, but also you got to come with results. You know, we see this every day here. Well, I'm ready for the next question.
Looks like we have two, and then we have some small groups to get into where we can continue the conversation. So Commissioner Gladys, and then Commissioner Bobby.
Yes, this question is about for Portland, about the racial equity plan that you talk about it. Can you talk a little bit about how do you develop that plan?
That's a Brody question.
Yes, it is. So unfortunately, I can't give you too much information because the plan predates me. I have been affiliated with the office since 2018, and the plan was finalized in 2017. What I can say, though, is that it basically, there was a citywide template that then was into each bureau to kind of break down and make sense of in its own way. Also, if anyone is interested in contacting me, I'm not sure if there's a chat, but I am comfortable with my my email being handed out by those who have it to send me a question, and I can also forward you to people within the city, like the Office of Equity and Human Rights and any other people who might be a little more able to give the nitty gritty details. But basically what happened is we got a template given from Office of Equity and Human Rights, and they said, apply it to your bureau, break down some key areas. We identified training, recruitment, data, budget, and then in those areas, set some 5-year goals and say where you want to be in each of those years, so that you can report out to the community and see if you're making progress.
Right.
Great.
It's actually broken down very well.
Great. We'd love to see that. Maybe we'll share that as well with the commission if that is something that you'd like to see, commissioners. Commissioner Bobby Vaughn, and then I think that's the last question, and we'll have to go to our small groups and continue the conversation there if the guest speakers can stay. But I do understand if you need to peel away since you've been working around the clock. Go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Question is really to the national city because of similar sized communities. And I'm wondering, I can imagine that many police departments might say, might bristle at the prospect of, community, oversight review boards. And, we're at South City trying to figure out how we can have kind of a, a win-win of transparency and building of trust. And I'm wondering, my question to you is there something that, has there been a time when you've said, I'm really glad we have this review board because it makes my job easier. It makes us a better department in any specific way. Could you speak to sort of the positives that you've seen by virtue of the fact that you're in a community that has such a review board?
That's a good question. I mean, there's probably a lot more than I know of, but you know, just like one of the speakers talked about, the public forum gives the entire public to see that, hey, we're open to change. I think the fact that people can come and talk to their police, that they actually give us the authority to do so is huge. I mean, there's so many times that you can never get a hold of a police officer or firefighter or a public official. This is a venue right now that, you know, just the fact that you can resolve problems in the community, and these people, they come from it's a diverse background. And I think that's very important in the fact that you get a group that can work together. You're going to have different ends of the spectrum, but the fact that we were able to bring all these people together, we have clergy, we have HSI people on it, we have activists, but I think the good thing is it brings them all together, and with the training that they get from requested training, they'll ask the police department, hey, we would like training on, the latest one was our PERT team, which is psychological emergency response team that we work with in San Diego County. That's the kind of stuff they don't understand what we're doing. So it's spreading a positive message to the community through another medium instead of social media or the media. They actually get to hear it firsthand on an open forum, whether it be on Zoom or in person in the council's chambers. So I think the biggest thing is putting that information out and building those bridges between the community and the police department. There's been some really good success stories of people that come in and they don't, like I said, they don't necessarily want to file a formal complaint. They just don't understand the process. And okay, because we're doing this as police officers, this is what we have to do by the law. And a lot of people don't understand that. And it's just, like I say, opening the book and letting them read and understand why we do things.
Well, that I think is a great place to maybe say thank you again. I feel like I've heard so many questions throughout our many meetings, both from commissioners and from community members. I feel like between Portland and National City, you've answered so many of those questions and really brought it alive, to kind of explain the process and the challenges, and also kind of the openness and the way that you're able to address the issues that are emerging, as they happen, which I think is one of the things we've heard consistently in this commission. I know folks have to go back to their many, the guest speakers have to maybe take off, but you're welcome to continue to stay. We'd love to have you in the small groups if you have a little bit of time. But really just wanted to thank you again for coming and sharing your experience. And I might take you up on Brody, on giving out your email. If people have more questions, let us know. We have an email system that if folks have additional information or questions that they have, keeping the conversation going. On that note, we are going to break into small groups. I did want to mention that for community members who haven't received all of the packet of information that we just reviewed, along with additional pre-reads, that will be posted on the website very soon. I don't think it's quite there yet, but we've covered a lot of material, and it's all in format that you can go back and read because it will be there very soon. So with that, it's hard to peel away from all the faces into the small group, but I just want to express deep gratitude for your work in all across the West Coast, and hopefully we'll bring all of what you've just said in our small groups. So with that, I think we have about a little bit less time than we had originally intended, because we want to get through this and then come back as a commission. I think we'll do about 12 minutes. Is that where we're at, Paige? Small groups, something like that?
I can drop it to 15, I think. I don't know about 12.
Let's do that. Okay, let's do 15. We have about 3 questions for you that we'll be covering. Okay. See you in our small groups. Okay. So we have, so the small groups, as we know, the way that they work is that it's an opportunity for commissioners to kind of dive in, answer questions, and then we'll do a report out. Probably pretty brief today since we've heard a lot of information. But we did want to have an opportunity to check in with you all based on what you've heard and what you've read. We wanted to get at these questions. So maybe Commissioner Vanessa, could you read the first question there?
How San Francisco is legally allowed to do? What should the board's roles and responsibilities be?
So let's take a few minutes and just focus on that. The other questions include what responsibilities should the advisory board have to the community, and then we'll talk about the membership. But let's just take a minute. What we have on the right here are the recommended roles that Sharon Watts, the fellow, outlined and recommends based on the literature. But we wanted to hear from you if you had a particular role of these or other role that you wanted to talk about. Do any of these roles really stand out based on everything you've heard today?
Am I on? So Tim, I think this is Mark. I think definitely creating an avenue and a space for the community to interact. I think that's very, very important. To provide that space for kind of continuing what we're doing here. In terms of providing the avenue for folks who are concerned about economic inequalities or racial injustice, allowing them an opportunity to kind of speak and kind of bridge that gap in terms of providing insight. I think this is a great forum to have, because I think we all agree that while I think that this is going to end in June or July, we still want to have an avenue for folks to continue the conversation.
Right, so the liaison, the listening sessions, bringing issues. What else?
I think I'll go. One of the things that stuck with me from it was finding the data points and the and things that people want to bring up to the review board, and then organize and tracking trends, because that's not something an individual can do necessarily, but having the resources to be able to track and organize and track these trends so that we can make changes and recommend changes. I think that that's something that the board will definitely benefit with.
So looking at the data and then using that data to inform recommendations moving forward. Commissioner Hermes or Gladys? What stands out for you? Gladys, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm actually, it's more of a question on the first point, to initiate and lead conversations to increase employee awareness. That doesn't feel like should be the role at all of this, because I think it's more the relationship with the community. I think that if we're thinking about the liaison, the position, that role is more appropriate for somebody who is working for the city and is working on those plans. But I think for this specific, the responsibilities of the board should be more on the that promotion of the positive police community relationship, and not only to me with the police, but with all the departments and the
so the third
city.
dot, the third dot to the the third one there.
So including the police department, but I think there is a lot of other departments that have direct connection and communication with the city, that
Mhm.
you want to promote that at all levels of the city government.
Right, right. Thank you. Commissioner Hermes, what would you want to add to that?
I would like to add a general comment. I'm trying to see. I feel like a lot of the things that we want to bring to this board, the city already has in place many bodies that is for the community. My question, what I would like to see is how we're going to bring the community on board. In the community, and it's not easy to get the community involved. So we can be making plans that the community will bring their inputs, and it's very hard to get inputs. Tomorrow we have a community event for the 108 Express Lane, and I'll invite you all to see how many community will participate. I hope it's a good number, but I'm afraid to say it will be very minimum. And so we need to focus how we're going to get the community involved. And one of them is already exists. You know, another example is I'm a commissioner for the Parking Place and Traffic and Safety Commission, and it's very hard as a commissioner to actually make an impact. So we bring suggestions, and we heard the voices from the community, and we put it on the commission, and we don't feel like it actually goes farther than that. There is no, you know, unfortunately, we don't, that's what I asked earlier, if we don't have a secretary that, or a council member that is part of that commission, we will not go farther with this commission. So it's very important to have a council member in the commission, even if he's not available every meeting, like liaison to advocate for that, for this board. Otherwise, we'll be like any other commission. I don't know about the other commissions, but the commissions that I participate, it's very challenging, very simple items to actually bring results, very different.
Okay. Interesting points. You did a great job of actually answering a number of the questions we had here. Should we go back to the other slide and just make sure, I think we covered quite a lot. Did you want to add anything else in terms of key roles? In terms of like making recommendations to, I think that we heard pretty consistently from comments today, that first dot there, to improve equity, diversity, inclusion through public safety policies and procedures. What do you all think of that? Is that something you'd want to see the board
Yes.
engage in? Yeah, okay. So maybe in terms of policies and practices, probably the first two dots, actually. Okay. Okay, well, let's go. Anything else before we move on to the next question? We heard certainly, you know, how do we get robust community participation in terms of making sure that the community is front and center. Anything else that you want to add on that?
No, I think we're good.
One thing I've heard was making sure to report back to the community on progress, right? It kind of links back to what you were saying, Commissioner Hermes, but you know, just making sure that there's a feedback loop. So if things are happening, what's happening, and making sure that there's information that's shared. Okay. So reporting back, yeah.
So can I ask the question? Because one of the comments that of the emphasis that it was done by one of the persons in the Portland team about results, based on results.
Yeah.
And it feels to me that I'm a little bit concerned that how do we assure that kind of the work of the commission to be results based? And I don't know
So,
really,
uh-huh.
how do we include that? But to be really focused on results.
Right. So making sure, I remember that they were saying that there's clear kind of achievements or outcomes that's in the plan, it sounds like, the racial equity plan, that I think as part of the report that we're going to be preparing, we're going to propose, ways of tracking progress. So metrics that do that. Is that sort of what you were thinking?
Yeah, and I'm trying to hear what one of the commissioners is saying about what the community cares about,
Mm-hmm.
and that accountability around the issues that the community cares about. I mean, I'm in my work, I know that I'm very policy oriented, but that's not what people really care about. Really, people is really connected to very concrete things that affect their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if how that is included, because I think it needs to be a balance.
Mm-hmm.
And the primary focus should be really to hear the voice of the community, and the very concrete, the concrete things they're bringing to this board. So
Thank you. Those are great points. Right, so the membership is the last question. I think we probably have a few minutes left before we go back into the large group. There's quite a lot of information here about what the vision possibly could be based on the review. Anything, so we heard, to make sure that someone's on the council as a bridge and a voice and an advocate for the advisory board. What else? Who else?
So I think one of the concerns that I have is this is all obviously generated through the application process, right? So what the concern I have is if we get a group of applicants who want to participate, but doesn't encompass maybe a segment of the population, what happens there? Then we're not reflecting the community if we are selecting from a group of applicants who might be, let's just say, are represent a group that's already represented on the commission. And so that's the concern, because this, again, it's all generated based upon the people who apply.
Mm-hmm. So are you suggesting maybe there's an outreach team that, I don't know.
I think outreach is definitely going to be key. Right?
Yeah.
And I can say, just based upon, I think the city manager mentioned today, that we have a board's commission meeting tomorrow, and there was a huge number of applicants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm happy about that. What the concern I have is there's been years where we've only had maybe a handful of people who applied for.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that's not the case when this commission is set up, is that we do get a reflection of what the community looks like.
Great. And I know we just have seconds left, but thank you so much, group. We'll report back to the larger group and sort of hear what others have to say, but appreciate your thinking. And again, this is sort of we're gathering information, and then we're going to be bringing back a specific proposal based on this information.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In the 30 seconds. In terms of members being residents, I can imagine many, many good reasons for that, and certainly I'm not opposed, but I'm just curious. I remember a data point from the chief that most of the people arrested are not residents. And so I'm just curious if, and I don't believe there's anything here around people who've had experience being arrested or being in jail or anything. What do people think about those things?
can you repeat that? I'm not really sure if I understand the question.
Gotcha. And sorry, actually, I need to go back to the room, so I will.
Okay.
I'm going to skip that, but yeah, thanks.
We'll follow up on that later. Hello, everyone.
There's always never enough time.
I know. This is the thing. We were, you know, with all the information that we heard today is trying to answer lots of questions, and then we asked you more questions. But we did have 3 questions. Is there a small group that wanted to start? The report back. And Edith, look, did you have your hand up? No. Okay.
Well, I did, but not to report. I wanted to, we didn't get to number 3. So number 3, I want to say something. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Perfect. Let's see.
I can start if nobody's volunteering.
Thank you, Myra.
Okay. So we had commissioners Mike, Norm, Kayla, and the chair. I don't think I missed anyone. Some of the pictures weren't, you know, some of the photos weren't showing. But as it pertains to roles and responsibilities, here's the wish list, here's the hope, to create a safe space where people can actually feel comfortable expressing concerns or complaints about police, so they're not having to go directly to police, so that this would be that safe spot where people would feel comfortable sharing. Lifting the veil of secrecy, talking about solutions and seriously building trust with many of these tactics. To also have that back and forth, have questions answered, really have, focus on accountability, and keep up with best practices around the country. And not just do this in a vacuum, but look at what works, like we did today with hearing from speakers, what works in some other areas and remaining open to that. There's a question about how National Cities Review Group has access to files, and the group would like to follow up with that at another time and get more information from them. In terms of the second question, which was about membership, there was, and we got some good advice from Brody. Try not to make it all about a certain level of education or creating, elitism or unintentionally creating non-diversity by saying, well, we need all lawyers or we need all this. Remember the marginalized communities. Remember to have a reflection of the community. And it can be difficult because there can be some negativity in the council appointment process, the assumption that that's not going to be representative. It can also be difficult to not lean into tokenism. So, that was another cautionary of look at people's experience. Are they already working in the community? And be sure to include advocacy. It seems like I'm missing one, Lisa. What did I miss? So roles and responsibilities. Oh, what would we like to see this body do, or what should the advisory board have to do for and with the community? And once again, that was about lifting awareness, making sure that meetings are public, making sure that it feels like a welcoming environment for people to come and participate, and to keep the communications open. So I will go ahead and yield to the commissioners and Lisa to fill in the blanks of anything that I left out.
And we'll be taking all the notes from the small group because it's hard to cover everything in a report out. So thank you for being so comprehensive. But we'll take those notes and make sure that they're in the minutes, and we'll inform the next steps. So Nayeli and Sharon.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. Is it possible to share screen? So let's see. Are you seeing anything?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, and Sharon, if it's okay with you, I'll start with a high-level summary and then have you jump in. So we only got to questions 1 and 2. We didn't have a chance to get to number 3, but that's okay. So on the first question about what the board's roles and responsibilities should be, there were a few key points that emerged. One is that communication is central, and that was actually a key takeaway. So both in hearing directly from community and in having an open communication agreement and system to really understand each other, what the police department does, and also for the police department to understand the community's very diverse lived experiences. Another is that the board could be a two-way bridge to increase and create more inclusive and representative civic engagement. So it's a step in the right direction. And again, working together and listening to each other. A lot of, what will need to happen is adapt from other jurisdictions. Some folks mentioned being intrigued by the high level of transparency that we share with National City. And also kind of needing to apply it to the local context. And then in terms of the responsibilities that the board should have to the community, a couple of things we discussed were establishing a trauma-informed approach. So really starting from a genuine community-driven space and making sure to address language barriers and maybe using promotoras and promotores to liaison with Spanish-speaking communities in South San Francisco to ensure both written and verbal communications are easily understandable. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we had 4 commissioners in our breakout, Bobby Vaughn, Andrea Fernandez, Jeff Azopardi, and Edith Arias. Sharon, I will pass it to you in case there's anything I missed that you want to add.
No, you did a great job capturing that, as we didn't get to answer the third question about membership contribution. So I do want to give Commissioner Edith Arias and the rest of our team time to answer that.
Just really quick, I wanted to mention in the composition of the membership, I would really like to recommend to have an individual with disabilities. I think it's it's a population that many times we oversee, and in South San Francisco, we really need to have that representation too.
Thank you. Other commissioners on our group?
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Well, there's a lot that actually resonates with what the commissioners in our group talked about. We had Commissioner Hermes, Gladys, Vanessa, and Mark. And some of the main points that we heard also was making sure that the advisory board focuses on injustices and listening to the lived experience of community members, bridging a gap, creating forums, a safe place to speak. So there's a commonality there, to track trends and use those data to inform recommendations. So to understand what the landscape is and move forward based on that. And let's see, I don't want to repeat a lot of what's been said, because I think just thinking about roles and responsibility, I think that covers it, some of the highlighted points there. What responsibility should the advisory board have to the community? Some folks mentioned the importance of conducting outreach so that community feels comfortable to come, because that's often, there's barriers there to joining a commission. And we've heard that people's time, if it's not paid for, how do you make time for these kinds of conversations? And I think, also just an emphasis on, we heard a focus from the guest speakers on results, and that was very interesting to this group. And what does that mean exactly? How do you make sure that that you're focused on results, and the results that the community prioritizes? And so we were talking about how the final plan is going to take a lot of what we've heard throughout this whole process and offer outcomes and ways to track progress in each of the areas that we're going to be focusing on, especially in this first year of implementation. And then I think, we also heard from the guest speakers of an interest in, as issues emerge, pivoting to those. And so we did hear that and talk about that in our small group as well, just to center the experiences that are coming out in the board. So I think lastly, we did talk a little bit about the membership composition. And one commissioner talked about the importance of having a bridge to the city council, so that, again, kind of that results-based interest, and making sure that whatever is recommended at the advisory board has teeth, and you can see results. And so, and then other kind of just thoughts on this was, you know, again, back to if applicants don't necessarily fulfill a particular described membership category here, is it okay to include them on the board? So just some initial thoughts on that. And so what we wanted to do now is to take a little time for public comment. I think we're up for public comment. I also know that we're running a little short on time, and I know some folks might have to go to other obligations, but I'm available, so I'm happy to stay for public comment. And then we also wanted to hear commissioners' final thoughts, but in any case, so let's open it up for public comment. That means anyone from the public who's not a commissioner is welcome to raise their hand and speak for up to 2 minutes. And I am going to look around and invite anyone from the public to ask a question. We still have some of the guest speakers here, or for the commissioners. Anyone has a question from the public, now's your time. Paige, do you see anyone's hand up?
No.
So we really want to encourage our public to comment tonight. This is very much a part of work for you as well. And we look forward to hearing from you. So please, you know, hang in there with us and share your thoughts.
I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay. Well, we are happy to then move to opening for commissioners to add anything else that they wanted to make sure to say before we end our meeting today. Again, the plan is to take everything that was discussed in the small groups and look back to the proposal, the recommendations, and bring you back a specific plan and proposal. It looks like Norm, Commissioner Norm, go ahead.
I just made it just a compliment. It was very informative, and the insight we got from listening to Portland, National City, I highly recommend that. It was very useful to get a perspective on how different cities do it. So that's probably I found it very helpful. And I want to compliment your staff for lining up these presenters, and thank you and say good job.
It was a team effort. I think Sharon took the lead on that one. Commissioner Ashley. And Ashley. Yes, a team effort. Commissioner Bobby.
I think Hermes might have been first.
Oh, sorry, Hermes. Go ahead.
Okay, Bobby.
All right. So I would say two ideas in my head right now. One is, I think it's important for the commission or for the advisory board to forge relationships with similarly situated advisory boards in the region or across the state to learn best practices and share notes and sort of learn together. I think that would be very important. And then also, I don't know if we've given thought to the role of the Chief Diversity Officer of the city and how that person would interface with or serve on the advisory board, staff it, or, you know, it's sort of interesting because the Chief Diversity Officer is coming out of the city manager's office. And as we had our kind of legal explanation, this board is coming out of the council. And so I don't know if that matters, but I think the Chief Diversity Officer, I'd like to think would have a strong role to play in getting this commission up and running, or getting the advisory board up and running.
Great points. I don't know, Mike, if you have thoughts on that, or should we keep taking
I think that's an excellent idea. So yeah, I'm right there. I think that's input we should take back and incorporate that as we take all of these thoughts and the initial ideas and then really boil them down to a final document such that we can bring it back to this body for one more check and then off to the city council. But thank you, Bobby. Good thought.
I know, as you were saying that, Bobby, I was thinking it's a nice balance. I think we've heard a lot of, interest in checks and balances and making sure to be connected to the key decision makers. And I think that's what I heard in what you were saying. Commissioner Hermes?
Yes, I want to say thank you to the guest speakers. Thank you for your time. I don't know if we discussed it, if this board is going to meet once a month, twice a month, and for how long. And also, if this board since if there is a hot topic, do they have to only talk within the meeting, or there is a Brown Act if they talk for the any topic by phone, or if there is something important happening? What are we envisioning as far as how we're going to give it more more legs for this board to actually bring results?
Let me address some of that, Kim. Yeah, as a formal board, it would be subject to the Brown Act. So they, majority of the board could not have a conversation outside of the public view. That ensures the transparency. To your point on meeting, I think they could meet as often as they need to, but I would hope at least once a month. And they could also form subcommittees and other, small subgroups to address specific issues, and they could meet even more frequently. I think it will be a function of how much time do the board commissioners have, and then also the staff. But I would hope not every 2 months. I think the issues are more pressing than that. So, but good points. Thank you, Hermes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Gladys.
Yes, I want to bring back the question that you asked about membership, because I don't think we fully discussed it. But I just want to make a point to my personal concerns about membership being, and I don't know if I understood it correctly, but the way it is in the slide is the city council will be the one who is deciding who are the members of the commission. And to me, there is a conflict of interest. I think I'm not really sure how that can be addressed. So, but I just want to put it out there.
Okay. We're taking notes. Any other comments? Questions? I know we're getting to the end of the proposed time. Happy to take a few more comments if anyone has them. Any other burning thoughts you want to make sure that everyone hears before we close our very informative meeting?
This is Vanessa. I can't seem to raise my hand.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about a review period to make sure that we're being the most effective with this new board that's being created, and making sure that we're meeting those goals and deadlines, and how that would go about, I guess, milestones to making sure that we're meeting those goals, and if we need to reevaluate that at some point. I don't know what kind of process that would be, but I'd like to make sure that we have that set up within the regulations that we create.
And this is Sky. I saw that there was a request for me to unmute. I had to step away for a second. I don't know if there was a question that had come up that there was a desire for me to address. I probably picked the exact wrong time to step away for a second.
I don't think there was.
Okay.
Was there? I don't remember anything that requires the city attorney to weigh in.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Thank you so much.
I think Brody would like, were you raising your hand, Brody?
Yeah, I had to. I can't raise my hand either. I think because I got me. I just wanted to say my chair that Tony had to leave the meeting, but he did text me and he said make sure everyone knows that they can be invited and attend a future PEAC meeting. Sorry, Equity Advisory Council meeting. He's right about the acronyms. It is a lot. Just so if anyone's interested, just get to my email and I can add anyone to the invite, and it would be third Tuesday of next month. So that's just if anyone's interested in attending that, and if they're interested in attending or connecting with any other City of Portland people, also message me and I will make the connection.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
I don't see anybody. Again, on behalf of the commission and the city of South San Francisco, I would like to thank Captain Graham Young and our Portland guests, Tony Dubois, Shana Pomerantz, and Brody Sargent. Thank you very much. I think it's another wonderful, informative meeting, and thank you to the staff for the hard work that they have done on the staff report. Great job, everyone. And thank you for the commissioners for speaking and speaking up and sharing your thoughts. Hearing no objections, meeting is adjourned. Wow, we're on time. Oh, not yet? Okay, great.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is Lisa still with us?
I'm
Did she have
here.
to hop off?
Do I get to get a
She's
plug
here.
for the community
Yes,
conversations about
exactly.
the
That's
draft
exactly what I
general
wanted you to
plan?
do, Lisa.
So there's actually a meeting going on right now if you want to pivot over. We're talking about health and equity. So just go on shapessf.com and you can find the Zoom link. But we're going to be talking about a lot of different areas that cover the general plan. We're trying to break it down into segments so that it's an easier conversation to have. But if you go on the city's website or the shapessf.com website, you can find a link to all those meetings, and they're also listed on this page. So thanks for the plug.
Lots of community input. South San Francisco is interested in lots of community input. And I will just say that we'll see you next then on April 21st, and we'll continue our conversations then. And then that'll be the last of phase 2, and then we'll move into phase 3 with looking at some draft report. So thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate the guest speakers and all of your time, and commissioners and the team. Lots of great work.
Thank you, everyone. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks.
Good night.
Hey, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, good night.